All right, so I'm here with J F Martel from the Weird Studies podcast, and I'm excited to talk to you. If you just want to, I guess, introduce yourself a little and say what you do and
Sure.
everything.
Um, yeah, well, I'm J F Martel. I co-host Weird Studies with Phil Ford. Um, and we've been doing this podcast for like almost 5 years now. I'm also a writer. I wrote a book called Reclaiming Art in the Age of Artifice, and I'm writing a couple more books right now that will be out eventually. And I do a little bit of teaching, and I'm by training, I'm a filmmaker. Did that for a long time, and I still, I guess, nominally remain a filmmaker, although I'm trying to focus on other things right now. But yeah, so that's what I do.
A lot. That's a lot of
Some
stuff.
people say I'm a philosopher.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I love
Yeah.
your podcast. I don't know if I've seen your films. What films have you done? You know anything I might
Oh
know of? Or
no, I was doing mostly like documentary TV. So
okay,
TV shows for Canadian TV.
oh, okay.
So probably, I mean,
No,
there was one show that went to PBS. It was called Skindigenous. I worked on the first season of that, and that's the one that's gotten the most play internationally of the things I've worked on. But
cool.
and I've done some short films, but I've pulled those out of circulation just because I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so it was more of, yeah, it was a job. Although of course I passionately love cinema, and am very much interested in the art of filmmaking.
Yeah,
um my I think my kind of drive in life is philosophy and the sort of things I'm doing now. Yeah.
that's cool. So you're
Mm.
probably where your interests lie most. Is it mostly in the Weird Studies podcast, or is it in the books you're writing, or what are you
Yeah.
writing, by the way? Or
I'm
did you?
writing a yeah, well, I mean, I'll give you the short version.
Sometimes you
I'm
got to
writing
keep
a
those things in the cooker. So I'm like, yeah, if you don't want to
yeah.
share, I totally get it.
It's too late for that, for the one
Okay,
book anyways, because I taught a course for neuro learning last spring called Groundwork for a Philosophy of Magic, which is the title of my book that I'm writing. And
nice.
so that's it's a book of philosophy, a book of metaphysics and aesthetics. It's kind of a sequel to Reclaiming Art, I guess, but it's going to be much, I think, much bigger as a book. Um and so I'm working on that. I'm also working on a book that I'm co-writing with Phil Ford. So that would
Okay,
be like Weird Studies, the book. That's
nice.
for Strange Attractive Press in the UK. And I'm also I'm working with another writer whom you may have heard of named Peter Biebergall. And he and I have been working on uh, books for the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. So I'm doing some of that too,
Dang,
because I'm a big tabletop gamer. Always
nice.
have been. Yeah.
That's fun.
So a bunch of different things. Yeah.
So how did you? I don't know if I've heard this before. I know some of your background that I heard on another interview with you. Um,
Yeah.
but how did you meet Phil? Because you said right before
Oh
we
yeah.
started the recording, you said that he lives in Indiana, you're in Canada. So
Yeah. But he is Canadian.
oh, okay,
He was born and raised in Sudbury, which is about 5 hours from Ottawa, but up north in the
okay,
northern part of the province. So he was born up there, but I didn't know him, obviously. I met him in 2015, right after my book came out, Reclaiming Art. We A friend of his was tweeting about the book, or he and this, yeah, were somebody, they were talking about the book, and I got tagged, so I got into the conversation. At that point, it was kind of magical just to see people talking about something
yeah,
I've written. Um and and we connected, and then we did an event in Ottawa together. Like, he came up because he's Canadian, he was visiting family around here, so we did a kind of book launch event at a place called Octopus Books in Ottawa, where I live. And we had this wonderful conversation. And after that one evening, um, we started to write emails to each other. So we started corresponding about all these philosophical ideas, all these things we touched on, art, and the weird was obviously a big subject for us. And and after a couple of years of this correspondence, in which we were writing each other emails that were like literally like several thousands of words to an email. They were like essays. We played with the idea of writing a book together. We talked about doing different things, but Phil was really into podcasts. I wasn't. I didn't really know much about podcasts back then. And he had the idea of doing a podcast, and he got the domain name like weirdstudies.com, and we did some research about different platforms, and we just started recording episodes. And I think we'd recorded like probably close to a dozen. Yeah, probably between 8 and a dozen episodes before we launched it. So we the first one we recorded several times because we couldn't get our format right. At first we had all these ideas about structure, and we'll have like segments, and that that didn't last long, that idea. And eventually we were happy with the first one, and then we canned it, and then we recorded a whole bunch more, and then we launched it in 2018. I think it was late January or February
Mhm.
2018.
Okay.
And that's how it started. That's how we met. That's how we started the podcast. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I think I stumbled across it just randomly. Like it didn't even, I don't know how I came across it because it wasn't one of those that pops up, it's recommended or anything. I don't know how I
Right.
found it. And it was maybe 2 years ago now. I don't know. But I think I've probably listened to
Yeah.
all of them. Was the first one,
Oh, cool.
it was about, was it about Twin Peaks?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I still
Yeah.
remember, vaguely remember that one, but yeah.
That one's, it was called Garmin Bosia.
Okay,
And
yeah.
yeah, and it's all about Twin Peaks and Hiroshima and all that.
Yeah.
So it's making these kind of crazy connections, and really focuses on the famous episode 8 of season 3, The Return of Twin Peaks. Um, and yeah, that was the first episode. Yeah. Cool.
That's
I'm
cool.
glad that it's good to know that you're a listener. I didn't
Yeah.
know. I wasn't sure
Yeah,
before we
yeah.
met.
No, no. I've listened for a while. That's why I said I was kind of nervous about this because I'm like, I've listened to, because I've really enjoyed your podcast a lot. It's probably
Thank you.
I was telling my friend Mitch earlier, I was like, I think the Weird Studies podcast and a lot of Jonathan Peugeot's stuff are probably my favorite, two
Mm,
favorite things to listen. And I like your guys' format
yeah.
too, because it just feels very um casual, like you guys are just friends talking. But then at the same time, you got,
Yeah.
I think it's, is it your brother or Phil's brother that does the music? Uh,
My brother,
yeah,
Pierre-Yves Martel,
yeah,
he's in Montreal. Yeah, he does all the music.
it's like perfect music for the show too. It just really adds to the vibe
Yeah.
of it. Yeah,
Yeah. He's been releasing it as an album. Like he's been like expanding tracks he did for us, and like releasing, he's got 2 volumes of this stuff now out
that's
there. So
cool.
if you're interested, his Bandcamp, you can just look up, like just Google Weird Studies Bandcamp, and it'll come up first thing. His name is Pierre-Yves Martel,
Yeah.
and he does all kinds of stuff. He's a really amazing musician.
Okay.
I'm not just saying that because he's my brother. He's actually good.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, yeah. So no, we were super happy to find that, you find a little, you can't do these things on your own, even with just like, so we've got, my brother is helping us. I had a friend of mine do our logo and that sort of thing. Um, and then Meredith, who's our kind of assistant. There's like a crew now, the Weird Studies crew, which is
that's
nice.
fun. Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Um, so what were you guys? I guess if you just want to touch on that again, you just recently got done traveling. You said
Yeah.
over in Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. We were invited to participate in the Diverse Intelligences Summer Institute, which is the initiative of uh, of 2 social scientists from UCLA. Erica Cartmill's an anthropologist, Jacob Foster's a sociologist. They're both at UCLA, and they started this yearly summer institute called the Diverse Intelligences Summer Institute, which takes place in Scotland at the University of St Andrews, where Erica studied. And so they invited us to go up there and do some talks, and also record a live show. It was
Nice.
fantastic. And
That's
then
cool.
so yeah, and then our publisher, Strange Attractor Press, well, I should say Mark Pilkington of Strange Attractor Press invited us, or set up this thing where we could do a live show at the Supernormal Experimental Arts Festival, which is down in near Oxford, or like yeah, between Oxford and Reading. So we went down there after the conference and did a live show there, and it was fantastic. It
That's
was
cool.
great. Yeah, when we did the live show at the festival, there was a punk band called, or like a thrash band, I guess, called the Plastics, and they were late getting to the festival, so they started their set at the same time as we started our recording. So like the first 20 minutes or 30 minutes of our show is just like you can hear this like ambient thrash
That's great.
punk music in the background. And fortunately, they gave us permission to release our show with their music.
Oh, nice.
So that's going to come out as an episode in a few weeks.
Okay, cool. I'll be
Yeah.
watching for it. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how much of that's why I'm not really sure where to go to here. I'd like to dig into something with you because I don't know, if I'll get
Sure.
to talk to you again, but then I don't know if it'd be good for you to
Well,
share
what's
some of your backstory too or what, or I don't know.
yeah, I mean it
Well,
can come out, but tell me about your channel, because I've been I listened to some stuff. I'm trying to figure out where you're going. It's really no, it's really interesting what you're doing. But why did you start this thing?
um man, yeah, I don't know. I started it a long time ago. I was like, well, maybe I should just try doing a podcast, basically just because I wanted to pick other people's brains.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was just I think everybody's just got a really interesting way of seeing things, and that people are can always see things you miss and stuff like that. So I just thought, well, it'd be cool to get just start a podcast and get some interesting topics. And then when I interviewed one of my friends, this was kind of the beginning of it. Well, the first episode we did was just about it was just me and my cousins kind of talking, just random recording. And then I think what kind of I think gave it the push was when I talked to another guy I knew that had just come back from a missions trip, and he was sharing his story. And I was just like, I should just get people's stories. And then it just over the years kind of just developed into now it's just kind of a hodgepodge of just almost random conversations where we'll just think of something, and sometimes we don't even have a topic. And like
Yeah.
my friend Kyle just texted me a few minutes ago and said, hey, does anybody want to do a conversation tonight? And then just no topic, we'll just see what we dig into. A lot of it kind of revolves around philosophy, theology, and universalism kind of comes up a lot in our conversations as well. But
Universe, like theological universalism,
yeah, yeah,
that all
usually.
shall be saved,
Yeah.
universalism.
Or I
Yeah.
guess it's not quite like I think a lot of people think at first, because almost everybody I talk to that says they're universalist really affirms hell. So it's not like that in a way, but it's just kind of the idea that even any sort of punishment is restorative, and it would
Yeah.
eventually ultimate reconciliation sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that comes up a lot, but yeah, it's a I don't know.
Oh,
Are
that's
you familiar
great.
with that or
Oh yeah,
okay?
very much. Yeah.
Very much.
I mean, very much. I'm not like an expert in it, but I'm very interested in the topic.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, what's his name? Wrote a great book on this subject. I always forget his name.
Rob
Uh,
Bell, Richard Rohr. There's a few of them I think that write about
yeah,
universal.
Richard Rohr is great. No, I'm thinking of Jesus. I don't know what's
Yeah.
wrong with me tonight. The
It,
names.
well, I don't. Yeah. See, that's the thing. I don't really know any of them. That's what
David Bentley Hart.
Oh, okay. Yeah. My
Yeah.
friend Cal and I think Luke. A lot of them will bring his name up a lot, but I've never read anything. That's what Cal told me the other day. He was like, "Your problem is you don't read anything." Like I just read. It's probably about 5 years ago now, I think I started coming back to Christianity, and so I just will read the scriptures over and over and over. And then I grew up
Yeah.
reading Calvin and Hobbes, so that's about my level of education there.
Well,
Well, I went to
it's
school
a
for,
pretty solid
but
foundation.
yeah, right. I love
Yeah.
Calvin and
I
Hobbes.
mean,
I still think it's great.
next time somebody gives you trouble for that, like Henrik Ibsen. Henrik Ibsen was a Norwegian playwright, late 19th, early 20th century, I believe, like late romantic, um, early modern kind of playwright. And he, at some point in his life, so I've heard, he just stopped reading books. And from then on, he would go to a coffee shop in the morning and read the newspaper of the day, front to back, like including all the classifieds and everything. He just read the whole paper. and he read the Bible. That's all he read.
Mm,
And he's like, that gives me everything I need. I get the latest from what's going on out there, and I get like the foundation of
that's
everything.
really
So
cool. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's how I found the Bible to be. It's just inexhaustible too. It's just if you ever
Oh
don't have
yeah,
a topic, you could just flip it open somewhere and it's full of mysteries. So it's just I don't know. But
definitely,
but it is interesting to
definitely.
me too that the more I read it, the more it leads me to these conclusions where like people will be like, "Oh, that's what David Bentley Hart says," and I'm like, "Oh, it's just what the Bible says, I guess." If you just stick with it, or these certain ideas seem to come up. So, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's all in there. So you know,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
it's like you know, um, Alfred North Whitehead said that all philosophy is footnotes to Plato. Have you ever heard that expression? So that all the philosophy is just people commenting on what Plato did. Like he kind of just covered the whole range of possible thought, and we're just kind of
just
refining or
picking at it.
exploring little nooks. Yeah, picking at it. But you
Yeah,
can make a similar argument, obviously, for the Bible, in the sense that it really is the foundation of the civilization of the West, at least as it exists, or as it has existed now for a couple of thousand years, no,
yeah,
um, 1,500 years, I should say. Yeah, so it's like it is inexhaustible. Like all great art, it's inexhaustible.
mhm,
Uh, there are people who there are people who treat like Lord of the Rings or like Tolkien's work in a similar way. Like,
yeah,
um, I'm not saying that they're equally valid. I think that, well, obviously Tolkien would argue that his work derives heavily from the Bible and other mythological systems, but there's something about art that's inexhaustible, like a good work of
mhm.
art. You can kind of like you can easily base a whole life around like Van Gogh's sunflowers. That could be your scripture, and you could do something with that. I don't know if it would lead you to a good place, but it is inexhaustible. You could keep doing something with that.
Yeah, yeah, because
Yeah,
it's like it's in its own way, it's kind of living and or it
yeah,
should be, I guess.
exactly.
If it's good art, it should be, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah, if
and
it's good art, it's living for sure. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
'cause I guess the artist can maybe have a way of killing it. It's kind of, I mean, I could be wrong in saying that, but that's kind of what I think. If you try to pin it down too much, you don't
Oh yeah.
like
That
let it live, sort of.
well, that's one of the main arguments in the book I wrote, which is that because it's called art, reclaiming art in the age of artifice, and so there's a dichotomy or distinction there between art and artifice, and a lot of what's called art, I argue, is actually artifice in the sense that it contains its own interpretation, right? It
Yeah.
it
Mhm,
forces your mind down a particular groove that it
mhm.
contains, and so it's not inexhaustible; it's fully exhaustible.
Yeah.
Um, you think of like a milk commercial or something like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
but or a lot of concept art, a lot of the stuff that wins prizes today in the art world, I would argue it's just concept. There's no
Yeah.
affect there. There's no symbol.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, you're right. It can, the artist, if the artist doesn't kill it, then the world will make sure it at least looks dead. Like think of something like the Mona Lisa, which on any day you can go to the Louvre in Paris and you'll see like just reams of people trying to get in there to snap a picture of the Mona Lisa, and nobody actually looks at it. In a way, by putting the art on full display, encasing it in glass, and reprinting it in every textbook, it's another way of neutering it, because
Yeah.
it eventually there's a patina of interpretation develops around it, like a crust of pre-digested thought
Yeah.
envelops it, and then it's really hard to break through. But I always imagine, like, the custodian at the Louvre at night just mopping the floor and suddenly looking up and seeing it for the first time, even though he's been working there for 20 years, and
Yeah.
maybe having a heart attack and dying
Yeah.
right then and
Yeah. You'd probably think you've seen a ghost or a spirit or something.
there.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so one other, I forgot to mention this too. The other author I've read, and I didn't start reading him till I think last year or the year before, and I've read almost at least everything fictional I can get my hands on. I haven't read all his unspoken sermons, but it's George MacDonald.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I noticed
I
that looking at your channel. I
yeah,
haven't
so
read any of this stuff.
oh man, you should. It's amazing. One if you pick up um his book Fantasties, I guess he was an influence on Tolkien and
Oh yeah,
C.S. Lewis,
definitely.
and that's why it kind of reminded me of that. And he has a quote. George MacDonald has a quote where he says, "Truth is truth, whether out of the mouth of Jesus or the mouth of Balaam." And so it kind of
Right.
reminded me of when you're talking about Tolkien and people, how people get truth out of his works, and it's almost this inexhaustible thing because he's just his truth is truth, and it is
Yeah,
it's there to just
exactly.
chip
Yeah.
away at for eternity. But yeah, his
Yeah.
stuff, his book Fantasties is I think my favorite. But Lilith, his book Lilith is probably one of the most profound books I've ever read, and it's
Never heard
just
about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's that would be a good weird studies. It's a trip. It's
Yeah.
definitely it's set in the spirit realm, so like two things will be the same thing, and you're like the first time I read it, I had no idea what was going on until about two-thirds through the book, and then it started to click together, and I was like, oh, okay. But
Oh wow.
yeah, it's fun. It's a good one.
Yeah, I keep running into his name, reading of the history of weird fiction and history of fantasy and speculative fiction. He's always there, but for some reason, I don't know if it's just because he has a boring name, like George MacDonald. I don't
Yeah,
know why it is, but I've never actually picked up any of his works. I should definitely look into that. I
yeah.
will.
If you just
Yeah,
read like the first chapter
of
Fantasties, you
Lilith.
might
Oh,
be. I mean,
Fantasties. Yeah.
Fantasties is what drew me to him, and I think C.S. Lewis said that was the book that baptized his imagination. Um,
Wow.
and so yeah, C.S. Lewis gave it pretty high praise too. But that one I think drew me in, because it's just that one's set in fairyland, so it's more of a fairy tale, which I think I'm kind of drawn
Right.
to that stuff a little more. Um, and Lilith is it's a trip, but I mean it pulls you in too. It's just I almost feel like it's a little bit harder read. Uh,
Challenging. Yeah.
yeah, because there's a character in it who speaks in riddles a lot, and you're just kind of like, what is this? What's going on? So you gotta,
Right.
but it's kind of fun because he starts off the book and there's a line in there, and he says something like, "I was reading in my library, and I came to the part of the book where I had to put down the book and think about, like, pause and think about what I was reading and meditate on it." And then it's like right after that, the next chapter, it's like he's hitting you with these riddles where you're like, you're like having to do the same thing. So he kind of like introduces you with this idea of like taking it slow, and then you find yourself doing it the next chapter. But I don't know,
Cool.
yeah, he's one I would probably well recommend, but like I said, I'm not well read, so I don't know. That and Calvin and
No.
Hobbes, get on it.
Yeah. I've read Calvin and Hobbes.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, yeah. So I didn't grow up with Calvin and Hobbes. I'm French Canadian, so I didn't really learn to read or speak English till I was 9 or 10. So
What did you read there? Asterix and
what did we
Obelix?
read?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Really?
Asterix. We
Nice.
read Tintin.
Okay.
Um, and I was obsessed with as a kid. This is pre-English. Like when I turned 10, I got Lord of the Rings. And I kind of learned English reading it. Because I didn't want to read it in translation. But before that, when I was younger, I read, yeah, there was Tintin, Asterix, um, those fighting fantasy books from the 80s. I don't know if you know about those. They're like choose your own adventure books, but they're a little bit more involved. Like they involve dice and it's like a game.
Okay.
I read tons of those books. I was obsessed with those books. And to the point
Nice.
where when I finally started reading real novels, I couldn't believe that I couldn't decide what the character did, because I was so used to these like game books where
That's
you get
funny.
to choose what the what the character does. Um, so I was obsessed with those as a kid. Um, and I read a lot of history books or geography, that sort of thing, or like I had this really awesome collection of biographies of like great people. I think it was translated from American English. It was an American collection. But they had like one on Confucius and one on um one on Socrates, one on like Thomas Jefferson. There's all these like, great personages of history, Mary Curie. Anyways, so I was kind of obsessed with those books too, and astronomy. Like a lot of boys, I was really into astronomy and um, machines and that sort of stuff.
That's
So,
cool.
but yeah, I was a big reader, but um, the fact that my experience of fiction with began with like aside from comic books, it was like choose your own adventure books, fighting fantasy books, and then actual Dungeons and Dragons books because I started playing Dungeons and Dragons around 9 years old. I was 9 years old. It really threw a wrench into my artistic wheel to a certain extent because like I said, like for me art was participatory, like it was something you did with other people
Mhm.
because or with the book, like the book let you in and let you decide. So when I started like writing fiction and writing screenplays, I was in my late teens, early 20s, it always felt like it wasn't the real thing. The real thing would be writing, you know a game, a fiction game, like a role playing game. So finally, now I'm doing that, which is really exciting.
That's cool.
But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, so that's a long answer to your question about what I read as a kid. But yeah,
No, that's really cool. Did you ever, I gotta ask it, did you ever read any Andre Norton?
no, I
Oh, okay,
haven't.
all right. That's fine. I haven't
No.
either. I was just
Okay.
asked because you mentioned Dungeons and Dragons, and I thought she was my like my grandmother's aunt, I think, and she wrote a lot of like
Oh,
fiction books that I think I've heard had a little bit of influence on like those games, but I don't know if that's true or not.
oh, cool.
But yeah,
Her name is Andre Norton.
yeah, Andre Norton.
Okay.
First started writing under Andrew North. Her real name's Alice, but wrote under Andrew North and then changed it to Andre Norton. But she wrote tons of books, and
Okay.
I never read any of them. But um,
Huh.
yeah,
Like fantasy books.
yeah, science fiction, fantasy, yeah. So,
Okay.
but I
Cool.
yeah, I don't know. Some people know her. It's weird. Like some people, I didn't know her because I didn't even think she was popular because we just I never really even knew her growing up at all, and then she died a while back. But I mentioned her name. Somehow her name came up to one of my friends in like high school one time, and he was like, "What the heck? How are you related to her?" Because she wrote, I guess, like the Beastmaster and lots of different things that he knew about, and I had no idea.
Beastmaster.
Yeah, I never. I was like, I've never read any of this stuff, man. In the Witch World, she wrote like a Witch World series or something like that. But
Oh yeah, here she is. Um, I've never been as like deeply immersed in fiction enough, like in any particular genre enough to know like all the authors, like
yeah,
even all the major ones. I kind of have a superficial um so that's cool. I'm looking at her
superficial.
Wikipedia page now. And yeah, she's written tons of stuff.
Yeah, it's insane. I don't know how she did it. It's probably her
She
witchcraft, you
was
know. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
It's probably,
yeah. She was an FWA grandmaster.
I don't know what that means. I don't know.
Science fiction fantasy writers of America
Oh,
grandmaster.
cool.
They used to, I don't know
Sounds
if they
cool.
still do this, but they used to rank writers like with the same system as they use in chess,
Oh,
like the
okay.
grandmaster
Dang,
or the master. So she
dang.
was like a grandmaster of the. Yeah, fantastic. That's cool.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
So did
Yeah,
you say
so
you're making a
yeah.
game now? You're creating a game or?
Um Well, no, writing supplements for a game.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, to explain what that means, and I have to get into like what tabletop role playing games are. I don't know if you're familiar with them, like Dungeons and Dragons and that sort of stuff.
I wish I was because I got the chance to
Yeah.
play it once in high school. But it was the
Yeah.
Star Wars version. But it was like
Oh
one of the
yeah.
funnest things I've ever done. It was so much
Yeah.
fun. And we only
It's
played
a
like
lot of
one
fun.
session, and then we never did it
That's
again. And I was like,
that's
man,
too bad.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
it's a lot of fun. Yeah. So I'm writing. I mean, Peter Biebergall and I. So he's an author. You can look him up. He's very talented writer, very smart guy. Um, wrote a book called Strange Frequencies, which is just coming out next month on paperback. If you want to look into it, it's a cool kind of exploration of the way technology and magic are connected and the occult. Anyways, Peter Riebergal and I wrote an adventure for the Call of Cthulhu game last year.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So, there's a game and then you'll have adventures that you can use in the game if you want.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like writing setting and characters and stuff, but there's no plot. You leave the plot up to the group that'll play the game. So
Yeah.
it's
That's
all the
cool.
fun parts of writing fiction and none of because plotting to me has always been the least interesting part of writing a
Really?
story.
Why is
Yeah.
that? Because you just
I
it reduces it, you think, or it takes the life away? Or...
well, I mean, I don't know. Like it's funny because we just Phil and I were just talking about this on the latest Patreon extra for the Weird
Oh well,
Studies
don't share it here
Patreon
then.
page.
Don't share it here. We got to get you subscribers.
Well,
Well,
I
we'll
will
edit.
share
We'll
it. That
we'll
way
edit
they'll
this
know
out
what
too. No, I'm just
they'll know what they're missing if I tell them.
okay.
So um I think this has to do with what I was talking about earlier with the role playing games and what I like. Let's say I'm watching a film by let's Stanley Kubrick or Andrei Tarkovsky, like a great cinematic gem, like um Tarkovsky is a great example. So you watch Stalker, and there's a moment in Stalker where the camera is just tracking. It's like pointed down at like a flooded room. It looks like you just see like there's this tiled floor and a bit of water flooding whatever room this is in. You never get to see exactly where we are. And then there's all these old objects, like I can't remember what, like an old pocket watch and little things under the water on the tiled floor. And the camera just tracks up through this space for a while until finally it arrives at the edge of a kind of pond where one of the characters is lying down. Anyways, it's a fantastic, amazing, dreamy, kind of beautiful shot. And then that shot to me makes Stalker, that and several others. The plot or the story of Stalker for me is much less interesting than these moments that occur that that occur in the context of that story. So for me, plot is like it exists only to allow for digressions. um, so what's magical in a story for me is the event, the sudden emergence of an image or of a character, of a moment. But the machinery of plot, especially when I can predict it, when I feel, oh, I'm reading an epic book and that's how it'll end. Like I can't watch a Marvel movie or DC. Like I can't watch that stuff. Um, First movie I ever fell asleep watching was like one of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. Like it was at the time, it was as explosive as you could imagine. It was like this crazy. Now the new movies leave that one in the dust in terms of just like sheer, cutting frenzy, cutting, editorial frenzied of action, whatever. So, but at the time, that movie was pretty explosive, and it just put me right to sleep. I couldn't remain awake watching that because it was so obvious that Spider-Man was going to win, like obviously, you know,
Yeah.
and but it seems like it's built around trying to create the suspense in me that he might fail. But that's like, because it's Spider-Man, I precisely know that he will win. So why is the story built around suspense or this like kind of thrill of like, there is no thrill. I know what, I just get bored with plot. And I'm not saying I'm right here. This is just an idiosyncrasy of mine, but I yeah, plot is the least interesting part of storytelling for me. The most interesting part is setting and character. I love setting and character. And like I was saying on that extra, you watch Game of Thrones, the show, or you read the book Song of Ice and Fire, and think what you will of the violence and the kind of
Oh, I love the
like,
show. You
yeah.
can, yeah. What?
Yeah, I love that
I
show
read
too.
I read my Bible all the time, but I love that show. I'm like,
Yeah, it's a great show. And one of the reasons it's so good is that there's no plot. I mean, there's plot in the last two seasons when George R. R. Martin had left and they had to wrap it up. And that's where people started, because whether they knew it or not, what was so incredibly affective in the first five seasons was the fact that there was no plot. There was just characters doing what they do,
Yeah.
and it all comes together in these amazing events that no one can predict. Like even a main character could die. Like there was
Yeah.
nobody had any plot armor, as they call it. Plot
Yeah.
armor means that you can't
Okay.
die because you're the hero.
Hmm.
Nobody had plot armor. So and that's why I love that show. That's why I
Yeah.
love, and shows like this, like The Sopranos, and a lot of the HBO masterpieces. The Wire. What was the other one? Breaking Bad, I've heard, is really good. I haven't seen all these shows, but I suspect that, I mean, they've always said, you'll read this a lot in books about the medium, is that TV is about character, whereas films are about plots. And I think it's by and large it's often the case. Great TV gives you the chance to go so deeply and so in depth with your characterizations, because you get these long arcs to develop characters. So plot is much less important. Whereas films, well, with a film, it has to wrap up in 90 minutes or 120 minutes. So you
Yeah.
kind of have to, at some point, yeah, as a writer, you kind of have to bring it all together and make it fit.
Yeah.
So that's my, yeah, that's
No,
my
that's good.
opinion.
That's good. I see what you mean by plot. I think when you first said the word, my mind was thinking just the story in general. And I was like, well, what do you have
No,
if your
no, I love
characters aren't doing
story.
anything? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that makes sense. I think
I
that makes sense a lot with writing too, right? I mean, or at least with good writing, I've heard that, and even trying to write a little bit, you kind of experience that of if you're actually going to be honest with your characters, they kind of do their own thing. Like
Yeah,
if you try to make them do something, it's just awful. It's just like
yeah,
you go back and read it later, and you're like, what the heck is this? This is the worst writing ever. But if you actually let them, uh, it's like a weird communion with the characters, and
yeah,
you discover
totally.
them. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well, the character becomes a kind of like what's the word, kind of a fragmented part of yourself. And
hmm,
so it's what Carl Jung would call an autonomous complex. It is another person that in great fiction, those characters are actual people. As like, for example, Raskolnikov, the main character of Crime and Punishment and Dostoevsky, is as real as Dostoevsky. Um, was as real as Dostoevsky when Dostoevsky was writing him, but now even more so, since they're both, like, Dostoevsky is gone. Raskolnikov is just as, they're both imaginal beings at this point, and they're
yeah.
both as alive. In fact, one is very much alive in the book.
Probably
That's the
more so.
character. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, the author kind of haunts the book too,
that's a
so
great way of putting it. Uh,
but they're both around, so
yeah,
yeah, I really think that fictional characters can become very much as alive as the authors. In
yeah,
fact, like, some fictional characters are obviously they exist outside their original fictional context. Think of someone like Sherlock Holmes, right? Like, Sherlock Holmes is a lot of people think he's a historical character
yeah,
because he's so real for us. And a lot of people, you feel he's real whether or not you've read the stories. He's just like, he's Sherlock Holmes. It's
yeah. That's
um
cool.
so yeah. He's
Yeah,
like a mythological creature, like a god or something. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So is this what you normally like to talk about? Like you get into? I remember asking you in the email. It's like I, you said what you normally like talking about will probably eventually bleed through and stuff.
Oh,
So
right.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, yeah, I love talking about stories and art for sure.
yeah,
I mean, since you've listened to most of the episodes of Weird Studies, that's pretty much what I like talking about.
yeah,
um, um, yeah, I'm really interested in philosophy as well. But for me, I really try and make an effort to see philosophy as a form of art, as a kind of, even as a narrative art. You know, one of my reading tricks is to this is something you kind of psychological trick you can try out. If you grab a book of nonfiction, read it as though it were fiction. Read it as though it was like an in-story document that somebody found in a book, and
yeah,
the author just went off and wrote the whole thing, and you're reading it And then when you read fiction,
That's
read it like it's nonfiction. And just by doing that, you kind of short circuit some some cultural stuff that puts you in a particular mindset when you're reading, let's say, philosophy. Like philosophy is boring, maybe, but if this philosophy were a kind of form of science fiction, it suddenly becomes interesting again. Like it becomes interesting when I read it as science fiction.
that's really
And
interesting.
it's hard to
Yeah, that's
explain,
fascinating.
but
That seems like a really good practice. I don't know. And for some reason, as soon
well,
as
it
you
is
said
for
that,
me.
it
Yeah.
reminded me of like just parables. Like you're kind of taking a
Right.
thing of history and looking at the parabolic aspect of it, um,
Correct.
which I
In
think is
fact,
true. Yeah,
yeah, I think that's a perfect way of looking at it. Because a parable isn't a metaphor.
yeah,
A
it's not.
parable is like, yeah, yeah,
It's like
uh,
it's weird because it's like it's fiction and it's true at the same time, and it's almost more true. It's
exactly.
really weird. Yeah, it's hard to. Yeah, when people reduce it to just a metaphor, it's like you don't get it. It's everything's parabolic in this weird way, and
Yeah,
everything. Yeah, which it's true. It's
totally.
true,
Yeah,
and it's fiction and nonfiction at the same time. So
yeah. It's myth, you know,
yeah,
in the original sense, not myth as in like, oh, that's just a myth, but myth as in mythos, like it's the aesthetic stuff of which we're made, the archetypes and all that,
yeah.
you know.
Hmm.
And I mean, even you think back on your life, even the shape you give your own life in memory is already a kind of fiction. Not in the sense that it's false, but in the sense that there's a selection going on. Um, you know, people
Yeah,
have a tendency to see themselves a certain way and they have the memories to back that up, or they have memories that contradict how they want to see themselves. Either way, there's a selection going on, right? You don't
hmm,
remember every instant of your life. You remember, like, how many times have you made coffee? Do you
yeah,
drink coffee?
yeah.
You've made coffee thousands of times in your life, but there's a kind of a one generic coffee making memory that will just be the placeholder if you ever think about, oh, what did I do that day? Or I made coffee that day, but you don't remember that particular instance. You remember coffee making in general. So
Yeah.
we select and we build a kind of imaginal uh, um, narrative of who we are. So we're already deeply in fiction. And that's
Hmm.
not to say that everything's fake. It's just that reality is kind of irreducibly aesthetic to a certain extent, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I completely
Yeah.
agree. And it's weird. You don't
Yeah.
really notice it in the moment though. I feel like most of the stuff or at least I don't. The most of the things I feel like I'll notice in hindsight, kind of like you're talking about when you're
Yeah.
looking back and remembering things. Even when people say stuff about like they don't see where God has been in their life. And then but if you just or like angels or like weird studies, weird experiences, sometimes you don't notice them and then you look back and you're like, wait, this is really
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
magical was going on here. And then if
Something
you
happened there. Yeah.
yeah, and if you actually acknowledge it, which weird, it's weird. I feel like when you actually acknowledge it and almost purposely fictionalize it or make it a bit fantastical, it almost rings more true. It's really strange. I don't know if
Yeah.
that makes sense, what I'm
Oh,
saying, but
absolutely.
okay.
I'll give you a kind of, no, I think you're onto something. I totally agree. One thing that I've mentioned in the past on the show, and I don't know how clear it was. It's like, if you've had the fortune of living in like a different city and come back to your hometown or whatever, if you lived at, let's say you spent some time living in New York City or whatever in the past, there's a kind of feeling to that time, but you don't really know how New York City, your time in New York City felt until you're gone. Then you look back and you go, oh, that was the feeling that was around. That was the kind of mood or the kind of like palette of that time.
Yeah.
And you know that it was there when you were there because you're remembering, you're feeling what it was. But at that time, you were probably reminiscing about the mood of when you lived in like Tallahassee or something. So like you weren't feeling it. We're always kind of stuck between the past and the
Uh-huh.
present and the future. We kind of span it all, but then we it's like waking up in a dream. It's like, you'll have a lucid dream my daughter was telling me she had a lucid dream a few days ago because she went back to bed in the morning, and then of course that's you're more likely to get those when you're napping or going back to bed. Anyways, she kept forgetting she was dreaming and then remembering. I think life's a little bit like that. We keep forgetting that we're dreaming, and then we wake up to how weird it all is. And then of course you, especially in cases where something paranormal happens or something weird, some angelic visitation or whatever it is, or demonic visitation, those are quite memorable.
Yeah.
um you suddenly realize sometimes after the fact, sometimes when it's happening it doesn't feel quite real, and it's only when you look back on it that you go, what the hell was that, and that's when it kind of hits you.
Yeah, yeah.
um
Yeah.
so yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
even in
I think
dreams too.
I
It's
love what
weird
you're
how,
saying. Yeah,
yeah, even
yeah,
how dreams do that. It's just so strange how certain dreams will, yeah, you might think, oh, it's just a dream. And then I don't know, 2 years later, you look back and you're like, oh God, that was not just a dream. Like that was
right.
something, yeah. And then the same thing with things that aren't fictional. Like you said, it's yeah, it's got this weird
Yeah,
way of working. And even you how you were talking about living in New York, there's a certain feel to it. And so if you were, I guess maybe that's kind of what I'm getting at too. If you were to look back on, say you spent like 2 weeks in New York, and then 2 years later you look back on it and you try to write about it or remember it, you would want to, if you were just true to the feeling, you'd almost kind of write it in a weird, almost fictional way, and then it would almost
yeah,
be more true, and then more people could
yeah.
inhabit it. Because if you just wrote, I would in New York, well, maybe these people haven't been to New York, but if they were in that essence or that space, the feeling, yeah, like yeah, I don't know.
That's really well said. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's exactly what I'm getting at. Is that there's a kind of a philosopher that I really like that you've probably heard me mention him before is Gilles Deleuze, a French philosopher, and he wrote about his big obsession, and one of them was the event. But the event is the untimely eruption of the virtual into the actual. So,
Yeah,
it's like when you look back, you see what it was all about. You see the event of your stay in New York, for example. But that event was not any particular incident that took place there, but it was like this virtuality hovering over the entire thing.
yeah,
And only once you're out of it can you look back and see what it was. And great writing, I think, specifically, or great poetry is about capturing that event, you
yeah.
know,
Uh-huh.
capturing what it was that wasn't in any of the details, but was kind of like, um, looming above it all
Yeah, yeah.
as
Uh,
the, yeah,
I like that
yeah,
you use that word poetry because it's kind of, yeah, it's like there's this weird poetic essence in
yeah,
the, yeah, like you're talking about. There's this
yeah,
essay I read a while back. It was by George MacDonald, and it's one of those. There's sometimes I read things and I'm just like, God, it's so hard for me to read. I don't know why, but it sticks with you though. Like I noticed it'll stick with me. But he was going on about, and he's not the first one to write about this, but the difference between poetry and prose and stuff like that, and
right.
how, yeah, there's like even in our words, in the language we use, it kind of kills the imagination over if you're being too particular and overuse of it. And there's like even in the words we use, it's just a body for like a poetic thought. And it's like you're talking about, there's a poetic thought or spirit or feel or something in the air that if you're true to that, it's that you're getting closer to the truth in general of
Yeah,
the circumstance that you, whatever
yeah.
happening event, the event. Yeah.
Oh, it's very, very cool. Paul Klee, the painter, said that art was about making the invisible visible, and the invisible is that event, is the event.
Yeah.
You look again at like something that a Paul Klee painting, and you can see that he was really trying to capture the event. Um, and that requires a lot of fabulation and trickery. And another artist who spoke about this is Werner Herzog, the filmmaker, and he makes a distinction between what he calls ecstatic truth, which would be like what we're describing as the event, the invisible in the visible. He made a distinction between that and what he called uh, factual truth, or he calls it the truth of accountants. And the
Yeah.
truth of accountants is like, oh yeah, I went to New York, I took this train, I got off at this station. I went to this hotel. I had this for breakfast, and you kind of just catalog the events. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, if I can get minute enough, then I'll have a full record of my trip. But it'll just be a sequence of disconnected, not,
Yeah.
trivial things. Um, um, and so that'd be like the truth of accountants, the factual truth. But then the ecstatic truth is what it was like to be in New York, what it signified,
Yeah.
what you'll find in a great poem about that, or a great novel or film.
Yeah. I wouldn't even know. Where would you, do you have any suggestions where you'd begin with that? I was trying to go through my head, like run through my head and think of, if I was in New York, how would I describe this with like maybe sounds and smells and shapes? I don't
Yeah.
know. What are you thinking? You got any
I
ideas?
think about New York specifically.
Yeah, like if you were just trying to describe, like, I don't know. Yeah, if you had an afternoon in New York, how would you describe that poetically?
Well, I've I've only been to New York City once.
Oh, but you've been there in spirit. See, we're talking about the essence of it.
Yeah, yeah, I know, but I can't help but go to the time I was actually there.
Oh, okay.
Um, it was
I've never
very, very
been.
cold when I was there. It was very cold. I don't know. I'd have to find the way of a way of getting there. And that's the hard work of art,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's not easy.
yeah.
But
It makes me kind of
there,
think of Gotham City. Like for some reason it has a, that
well,
has a
Gotham
very,
is based on New York. Yeah,
yeah, and it has a very, I think some of it was filmed in Chicago. I've been to Chicago, but they have a, that, the imagery in like the Dark Knight movies has, I feel like it kind of gets at the feeling of the city as well. Or normally
yes,
Gotham City does that. It's very dark, very, yeah.
yeah, yeah. The time when I was there, it was quite dark, and it was like early winter. um I really love the feeling I'm getting. And when I was there, I ended up going to the, what's it called, there's a German museum, German art gallery museum there. If you could probably easily find it. Anyways, I went to this, like, the new something gallery, I can't remember. Went there, they had a Alfred Cuban exhibition. Alfred Cuban was I guess a German artist. Maybe he was Austrian. Really, really interesting. And they had a Klimt there. The Kiss. I think it was the Kiss. Or was it the one of, see, that's so weird. I saw this like crazy rare painting, and I can't remember if it was the Kiss or the one, what's it called? Athena or something by Klimt. See, I can remember the scene with both paintings on the wall, and I don't know. But the Klimt really struck me, whatever it was. So that particular part of the trip really kind of just colored the whole thing for me.
Okay,
So
yeah.
if I were to write about New York, I would do it in a kind of aesthetic of Alfred Cuban and Klimt. I would kind of,
Yeah.
that would come in. And it's not, the idea isn't that my version of New York would be like the definitive New York.
Yeah,
Obviously, it would
yeah.
be highly subjective and idiosyncratic. But how could New York be anything but that? New York
Yeah.
is a like several million people, and so you can only have a very unique perspective
Yeah.
on the object. But that perspective also has an objectivity to it. For instance, if you see a blimp, flying across your yard, I mean, it's just your particular, the people in the blimp and the other people are getting a totally different experience, but that doesn't make the blimp just a subjective event. So my New York with like Alfred Cuban, like redesigning everything is no less the objective New York than
Yeah,
the New
yeah.
York of like Oscar the Grouch, or Big
Yeah,
Bird.
yeah. I like they used blimp of all the things you could use. I guess I don't know what else you'd use. That was a good example. I was just like, man, I don't hear that word very
I
often.
just say, well, what's something that you see that has a definite shape, like very
That's true.
geometric, objective, and yet that you can't
Blimp.
touch, like you have to just see it. A blimp.
Yeah, yeah, great. Yeah, but I like what you said though, because even but then if you wrote of your experience in New York, it's like if you, it's almost like if you left out the fact that you were in New York and just wrote about your experience like you're talking about, then it's more transcendent in a way, and more people can inhabit it that way. It can
Yeah.
Because if it had to be in New York, then it, like you said, it starts putting it in a box and containing it. And uh, what was the you said it a while back? It could like only be interpret. You're defining the interpretation, and so
Yeah,
less
exactly.
alive at that point. You're killing it in a way, but yeah,
Yeah. But if
there's
you're if it's gonna rise above the other all the endless, innumerable accounts of New York out there, it's because if it's good art, good poetry, it actually attains to the objective. It's not just that you're true to your own experience, but in being true to your experience to that degree, and in being
see,
able, and this is the hard part, of transposing that experience into your medium, then you finally get something where you're like, oh, when people read your work and then go to New York, they'll go, holy shit, that's
yeah,
exactly what he was writing about. I know what he was saying, or I know what she was writing about. And that's the weird objectivity of art. We always
yeah,
talk about art as subjective, but if art is completely subjective, then it's literally worthless. Um, Deleuze described art as a science of the sensible, meaning that it's a science. It's just a science that operates through the sensible instead of through the mental. Um, it works with
yeah,
what philosophers dismissively called secondary qualities, the things that are seem to be just subjective, like color and smell, things that you need a person there to for them to kind of exist. But those things are turned into objective uh, qualities of the world in art. And art, in a way, art is constantly reminding us that we're dreaming. You know,
yeah.
um,
That's interesting. Science of the sensible. I'm gonna have
yeah,
to think on that. That's a good one to think on for a while.
yeah,
So
yeah. Think about it.
that I have a question with that then too, because you mentioned science relating to magic as well. So how does that play in with art being the science of the sensible and magic being related to science? Is there a way to tie all that in?
Yeah. There must be.
Because part
Well,
of me
magic
thinks
magic is a tricky word. What do you because we could be talking, we could be using the word magic in totally different ways.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I don't know how would you define it? Do you have a certain definition you like to go by?
Um well, what's Aleister Crowley's definition? Is
Oh, no.
magic is the how does he put it?
It's something like is he the one that says it's kind of like you're trying to impose your will on a scenario or something?
Yeah, but he doesn't really mean it that way.
Yeah, that sounds a little
It's
harsh
the
in that way.
So yeah, here we go. He says magic is the science and art
Nice.
of causing change to occur in conformity with will.
Okay.
So
That that sounds a bit
that's just
more
too
manipulative.
vague.
Yeah, and I don't know.
Um
Because to
yeah,
me, I would personally think poetry could almost be a form of magic in that it does what he's talking about is it brings about change. But if you're purposely trying to
totally.
be manipulative and there seems like it could get pretty malicious pretty fast. I don't know where.
Oh yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
think magic can get very, very pernicious.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. And
Yeah.
magic is usually causes nothing but trouble if we're talking about actual practical magic. Like, but magic in the sense like art is a form of magic. I agree. Yeah, art is definitely a form of magic, and science is a form of magic. Um, and by magic, all I mean is that art and science are ultimately rooted in a kind of acausal miraculousness of existence as such. Um, like science is founded upon the idea of causation, right? But a lot of philosophers have noticed that causation can't explain itself. It can't ground itself. So, in a sense, causation can only float in the acausal, which means that the trust we put in a world that's stable, uniform, and consistent enough for there to be science is a trust that's founded in a kind of faith in the miraculous nature of causation itself.
Yeah.
So that, science, the idea that I'm going to go to the Galapagos Island and I'm going to look at animals there and I'm going to figure something out about the origins of the human species in fact, of all species. That's what Darwin does, as a kind of act of prophecy. There's no real way. He had such trust in the signs that nature was giving him, such trust that they all made sense and that things make sense all the way down, knowing full well that they don't have to make sense. We could be living in a topsy-turvy Alice in Wonderland
Yeah.
nightmare, but
Hmm.
we don't most of the time. Sometimes we suddenly do. But he trusted the world, and that kind of trust or faith in nature that allows, look at what science has made possible. I mean, and the thing about science and technology is they are precisely built around realizing things that were first imagined by magicians and storytellers, flight,
Yeah.
long distance communication, all those things that magicians could do, or that um, storytellers and myth makers imagined magicians doing or gods doing, we've
Yeah.
made real. There's no real difference. I mean, so maybe that's, if I say, well, that's what magic is, well, then maybe magic has become so loose a concept that it doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
But I guess then we have like actual practical magic, like the actual uh execution or practice rituals in order to obtain effects
Yeah.
uh through the manipulation of occult forces. That's
Yeah.
another, that's a very specific type of magic, and I think that also
Yeah.
exists.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. When
yeah,
you actually believe in like spirits and angels and stuff, it gets, yeah, there's a lot of different forms that it can take on. And like you said,
exactly.
gets pretty
Yeah,
tricky and pretty dangerous pretty quick. And it's not reduced to yeah, I guess there's this weird way. I don't want to say science. I don't know what it is, but there's a weird way of reducing it to materialism, like you said, and it's a lot more than that. And there's spirits can be
yeah.
involved, and then there's also when you start even thinking about just consciousness, there's just weird subtleties to it where it's just yeah.
Oh yeah.
But
And magic is a fraught word, magic, the word comes from magia, from like an ancient Greek word which meant um the art practiced by the rulers of Persia, who were the Magi. For a while, they were the rulers, or they were like the elite in Persia, but they were eventually, I believe, massacred. This is a particular group in the Persian Empire who had a lot of power for a while. They were actually like an ethnic group, but they were reputed even in Persia for having like magical powers and practicing these arts. And for the Greeks, the magi, the magi, these Persians were the ultimate other on which the Greeks could project all of their fantasies and nightmares. So that's where the magia, the words comes from there. And the craft of the Persians, Persia was the enemy of Greece. The craft of the Persian was seen as like this dark, sorcerous, exotic, dangerous art. And so and that became, that's the root of our word magic. It's the art of the East, the art of the Persians over there. That's what they do, the secrets that
yeah,
they harbor, and they've passed
that's
on to us.
interesting.
And so magic has always had the sense of, it's always what's excluded. So for instance, then you have Christianity comes in, and Europe becomes Christian, the Mediterranean becomes largely Christian. And then what happens is that uh, they have a bunch of sacraments, right? The Eucharist, but those aren't magic. The magic is what the other people are doing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, this gets a little weird. There's a because I grew up very I don't know if you know Word of Faith. That was there's I don't know. There's a lot of different denominations, but one thing they would do is the prayer cloths and things like that. Are you familiar with that at all?
no, I'm not.
Oh, okay. Well, it's basically it's this one passage in the Bible where it says cloths were taken from Paul's body. I think he was just in his work clothes or something, and then these cloths, I guess people touched him and got healed. And so there's
Right.
kind of this whole practice where you'd pray on a cloth, you pray over a cloth, and then you give the person could take the cloth, go lay it on somebody, and they'd get healed. And
Oh yeah,
I'm like,
I
yeah,
mean, as a Catholic, I know all kinds of things like that.
yeah,
I grew up with that stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And I mean, I think
like
it's
we had,
real, but it is kind of a weird form of magic. But I'm like, it works
it is
sometimes.
magic. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
it's funny because the people who do that than if you were to say, oh, I'm going to do a sigil magic and like, use the spirit of Saturn to channel, and people would go, oh my God, you're like a demon worshiper. But they're practicing magic themselves. I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
even if you want to go to another area and see the same thing happening. I mean, like, there's a guy named Joshua Ramey, really good guy, but really, really, really smart philosopher. And he wrote a book a few years ago called Politics of Divination. And in that book, he argues that uh, essentially, um, like Wall Street speculators are essentially magicians, not just like metaphorically, but modern economics is entirely a magical kind of practice. It's not called magic because it's so official. It's like in Persia, the magi or the magi, I don't know how they pronounce it, who were in charge, didn't see what they did as magic. They just saw it
Yeah.
as this is what the gods want us to do. But then they were, you know, the magicians were like the hedge wizards out in the country doing curses and stuff. Those people were doing
Yeah.
the bad form of magic, but the big official magic is. But economics is as practiced in many areas today. Arguably, economics itself, the basic axioms of it, is kind of makes it a form of. It's basically the same thing that astrology was for 1,000 years, 2,000 years.
Just making
Um,
predictions in
which
that way. Is
that
that what?
does making predictions based on really kind of almost arbitrary measures, choosing a bunch of, um, for instance, in classical, I don't know much about economics,
I
so
don't
this is
either.
not my
That's
argument.
yeah,
Any,
yeah.
it's not
Well,
my
the
argument.
reason the reason I'm
Yeah,
curious is
yeah.
because there's a like there's different kingdoms in the Bible, right? And then one of them that strikes me of uh like kind of what you're talking about, economics, is the kingdom of Tyre. Is that how you say it? Tyre or something? Because
That's
it's
how I
this
say it. Yeah,
yeah, the city that sits in the midst of the sea, right? And so that's the sea, and it's the merchant city. So
yeah,
it talk when it talks about it, it's the merchant city that gives all their goods to the poor, and it's like it has this weird capability of like making another kingdom rich. Like it says, no one knows how to cut timber like the city of Tyre. Like they can cut down trees, raise them up, and it's this in there. It's just kind of got this imagery of like ships carrying a bunch of goods going back and forth from the city, and the city sings her siren song, like the siren song of money and all this stuff. And it's just kind of it always makes me think of that. But then in
yeah,
the prophecy on it, it says, "Behold," when it's talking to like the prince or the angel of Tyre, it's like you're wiser than Daniel. I don't know what the exact text. It's in Ezekiel, but it reminds me of kind of like what you're talking about. This
mm,
when you can understand the ways of the sea and stuff like that, and the way the ships go back and forth on it, you're able to manipulate it in a way or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That's kind of brilliant. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, um, uh, capital or money is a god, Mammon
yeah,
is the name the Bible gives that god. I don't know if Mammon was the god of Tyre. That would be too good if he were. Um
yeah. I don't know. That would be
so
good.
it'd be but it's a god, and a god, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means that it's archetypal. It's
Hmm.
something that and but it is, I think, rather dangerous to be worshiping a god while thinking you're not doing that, thinking you're doing something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And the one of the problems with modern secular culture is that since it denies the existence of these archetypal, for lack of a better term, archetypal forces, it pretends like it's in control, and then it's not. It's in a somnambulist state, and
yeah,
it's like we
yeah,
wonder, like, think of how crazy history is when you look back, look at the last 120 years. It's like a kind of like a schizoid episode, and um nobody can know where we'll be in 10 years. And that's not just true now because of the internet. That was true in the 1930s. Think about the world between 1920 and 1945, like, or 1950 and 1980. Like, things were changing like they had never done before. And they're not
yeah,
just, it's not like they're not progressing linearly. Nobody can believe that anymore. We're seeing
yeah,
that all this technological progress involves a lot of moral degradation or regression. Like there's a lot of it doesn't just move in a straight line. It's kind of like we're caught in a dream,
Yeah.
or as Deleuze says, un vent de sorcière, which means like a witch's wind, a witch wind. It's like we're caught in this dream wind, and once in a while we're like, where are we going, what's going on, and then we fall back into it. And I think that's what happens when you're worshiping forces that you don't know you're worshiping. You think
Yeah.
they're just, you're in control of them, but they're
Yeah.
controlling you.
Yeah.
It's like Jung said, repress the gods, return as diseases. It's as simple as it could be. If you don't, you can either recognize the gods for what they are, or
Hmm.
deny their existence. They'll be in you, and they'll come out of you in ways that you can't imagine, and you'll never
What a
even
statement.
know what's going on. Yeah,
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 that's crazy.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's very sobering. There's definitely something to that. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of scary when you think about who's in charge and what's going on the planet, because it's pretty
Yeah.
scary what's happening right now.
Hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah, and there are these overarching god spirits, whatever you want to call them. I think the archetypal, um, yeah, like you're talking about, is a way of, I don't know. It's weird too because people, even in Christianity, that happens a lot, I guess, too. Not to throw rocks like my own religion, but even talking about Greek gods and stuff, a lot of people I've come across will shut down on those thoughts, and I'm like, no, they're very real. They're just personifications of these. Uh,
Paul talks about them all the time. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and they're very real,
Principalities.
and they're,
Yeah.
yeah, they're principalities and their powers, and they're up there and they're real. And the Greeks just had a way of personifying them, which is
Yeah.
incredibly beautiful to me and extremely interesting. But that doesn't make them not real just because you think
No.
they're people or whatever. Yeah, they're more than
No.
that. They're probably a lot more than their personifications that the Greeks gave them, but they're at least attempting to get at an idea. But I think there's something about personifying them that almost helps you recognize them there. I think when they're there, because then you could, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, and maybe that's, I don't know if that's entirely healthy, but it seems like you could, once you understand what Aries is, it's like you can notice him
Yeah.
when he's over a whole culture or something, like, or a whole event. You're like, oh, Aries is here right now. He showed up. And
Yeah. Well, I mean, just the simple fact, I mean, just on a purely psychological uh view, the simple fact that Aries, the spirit of war, inhabits us, it's in the psyche,
mhm,
explains why you want to personify it, because you want to recognize it in others and in yourself,
yeah,
even though it also exists. It's like one of the things I love about Neil Gaiman, The Sandman. Do you know that comic book series?
I don't. But is this the thing they just did the show off of or something on
Yeah.
Netflix? Okay, I've watched
Yeah.
a little
The
bit of
original,
that. But
I
yeah.
don't know. I would read the comic.
Okay, all right.
The comic is really great. One of the great things, so it's about this guy, he's the Lord of Dreams, right? He's a personification of dreams. But
Yeah,
in a lot of the stories, when Gaiman was writing stories, there's one where it's like in an African setting, so all of a sudden Morpheus, the main character, looks black. Or even like in one story, it's about cats, so there's like a cat version of him. So he exists at every level, not just culturally among different human cultures, like all these different cultures recognize the same archetypes, but also different tiers of nature. So there's one book that he wrote after the series where I think Morpheus, there's like a plant version of him on this other planet, because it's all plants, right? So
yeah.
like that's what an archetype is. So it, it needs to be fully personifiable,
Hmm.
right? Like Aries has to be fully a human character, but infinitely more, right?
Hmm.
He's also the redness of blood. That was Aries,
Yeah,
you know, the cloud of rage, or the cloud of the mist, the fog of war, they call it, when you're in
uh-huh.
battle, or and nothing makes sense anymore, and you're just like,
Yeah,
that madness that seizes soldiers on a battlefield is Aries as well.
yeah. The
He's
Clash
a
of
kind of
Iron,
storm.
all that
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. The clash of iron, and yeah, yeah, exactly. Um,
yeah.
so he's manifesting on all these levels, but to deny the personification is to lose sight of the thing that for us, because that's our image, holds it all together. So, and I think that in general, I think personifying things is a good. There's a great writer about magic. His name is Lionel Snell. He used to write under the name Ramsey Dukes. Uh, and in a book, he comments that, if your car breaks down, um, and you interpret it like, you can do a lot more if you make your car a person in addition to being a car.
Um,
If you go, wow, what's wrong with you, Betsy? And then
yeah.
you treat the car as a person. It's like, well, let's see, what have you been through lately? Oh yeah, there's that awful storm the other day. You had to drive that snowstorm. You had to drive through, and we had to, like if you approach an object like it's a person,
Hmm.
you'll be able to see a lot more in that object
Yeah.
than if you were just to see it as a inanimate thing that exists just now in front of me. You
Yeah.
give it a history, you give it a life, you give it plans and dreams, and
Yeah.
suddenly your car becomes a lot easier and more fun to
Yeah.
main to maintain and to upkeep than it would
Yeah.
be if you just saw it as a hunk of junk that has no soul, right?
Yeah, that's hard. That's kind of hard to do because there's so many of the degrees of separation, I guess. Because I'm thinking like if with the car, like it comes out of the factory at this point, and so we've just kind of almost like killed it by the time it gets to you. Like if I were to go out and build a car from the
Yeah.
materials of the earth, I'm like, that would be my baby. And it would just like, it would have a personality and it would have a story and everything built into it. Cause it's like you took all the materials and put it together. And yeah.
Yeah, Phil and I have talked about that in the context of magic, right? So let's say you want to practice magic. Well, you'll need like a knife, right? And a chalice. What do? Do you just go to the occult shop and buy them? Or do you like find an old chalice that you can appropriate? Or do you just, do you make your own? Oh yeah, I have to learn how to smelt silver. Like I have to
Yeah.
learn, I have to go mine the silver and build the whole thing on my own. So like the more you can invest in it, the
Mhm.
more you identify with it, the easier it is to personify it. But
Yeah.
if everything is already personifiable because of the archetypes, then
Yeah.
that's just a way for you to access the personification that's already there, even in the store-bought, dollar store chalice.
Yeah.
And maybe that's harder to see. It's like when you get a new car, it feels really dead. I find it feels like an object.
Yeah.
It's a new toy. It's fully just your property. You're kind of proud of it. Oh, look at my new car. Don't eat my car. Keep it clean.
Yeah.
But then 10 years down the road, that car has suddenly, it has a personality.
Uh-huh.
It's become a person just by sheer force of
Gotcha.
enduring the elements and enduring you.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden your car can be personified. Like I have an old Nissan Rogue that's coming along in years, and yeah, I feel like it has personality now. It's got something. It
Yeah.
always had that. I couldn't see it before because it looked exactly like rogues.
Well, yeah, this is
But now that
really,
it's got all these bumps, and my daughter like scratched her initials into the hood when she was 4 years old, now
that's
it's
great.
like it's a totally unique rogue. It's a
Yeah.
rogue.
It's got its own story, like kind of has its own spirit. I don't know. It kind of makes me think of like
Yeah,
even like haunted objects and relics and things like that. It's kind of the same thing.
exactly.
And
Or haunted houses.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And when you buy
yeah,
like you'd almost there's a huge difference between buying a used book and a new book and everything. And people like even Christians
yeah.
will acknowledge that when it comes to books. Like if there's a book on witchcraft or something, it's like, oh, there's probably a spirit in the book or something like that. It's like, yeah, there probably
Oh
is. Yeah,
yeah.
you're right. You're definitely right about that. Yeah. Even this, like I was thinking, like this hat. My friend asked me, Cal, he was like, "Why do you wear the hat?" And I was like, "Well, there's a lot of reasons now. Like at first, I bought it just
Right.
because it was just, I don't know, a weird hipster thing. But I'm like, now it's like,
Yeah.
it's just been through so much. I got this little string on there. I went to India and a little girl tied it on there and said, "Don't ever
Oh,
take it off."
nice.
And so I'm like, "No, I'm never taking it off." So it's like it's got a lot of story, like you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind
Story and soul, like, it's
yeah,
the same thing.
starting to become a weird relic in a way or something. But um, I I don't know how long you have. I'm
That's
totally free, but I know we've been going
I
for
was
a
just
while.
writing you in the chat. Um, I was just writing in so that it wouldn't interfere with your recording.
Oh,
I was
okay,
writing.
okay,
I have to wrap it up. Maybe another, like we can like bring it in for landing.
okay.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. I did want to. I mean, I'd hopefully this won't be too long, but I gotta ask: Did you read that story at all?
I did. The
Okay.
Disc by
Do you anything like quick that you got out of it? We don't if it's like elaborate, we don't have to get into it, but
well, I'm just gonna summarize the story for your viewers, and then you can tell me what you think,
okay.
and then I'll tell you what I think.
I don't know. Okay, all right.
Um, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I'm just like me and my friend Mitch have been stumped on this story, so I don't know what I think. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm pretty stumped too. I was hoping
Okay.
you'd say so. Okay, so the
Okay.
story is a woodcutter. It's in the first person. This woodcutter is remembering an incident where um he's kind of this sour, bitter man, right? He
Hmm.
used to have a brother. His brother died. Now he lives alone off in the woods, kind of a recluse, a bit of a hermit, um, off in the forest somewhere in England, it turns out. But it's kind of weird, fantastical England, it seems.
Yeah.
And one day the stranger shows up at his cabin and says he's homeless and needs a place to sleep. So the woodcutter feeds the stranger, and gives him a bed to sleep in. He sleeps in the bed where his brother died. The woodcutter's brother died. And then the next day he's walking him to town or something. And then the uh the stranger drops something. Was it his cane? Drops his cane on the ground and
And tells him
tells
to pick him
tells the
up.
woodcutter to pick it up. And then the
Yeah.
woodcutter's like, why should I pick up your stuff for you? And he says, because I'm king. And he said he claims that he's a king. He's the king of the sections, which
Yeah.
I don't know if it's that's a real people. I've never seen that word
I
before.
yeah, I
I think
didn't
it's
I
yeah.
don't know either.
He's the king of a people. So it looks like it's taking place like in the Middle Ages, right after uh before the Norman conquest, when all these different Germanic tribes were kind of like coexisting in England. And so this guy was the king of one of these people, was my impression. But now he's lost his kingdom. But as long as he holds the disc he has in his hands, he'll remain king. So then the guy's like, show me the disc. And he opens that and you can't see a disc. And then the stranger says, well, the disc is in my hand, touch it. And then when the woodcutter touches the man's palm, he can actually touch the disc. So it's invisible. And then the stranger says, this disc is the only object in the world to have only one side. It's a disc with only one side, which I think is just brilliant, which is
Yeah.
why you can't see it, right?
Yeah.
Um, so the woodcutter wants the disc. He tries to buy it off the stranger. The stranger refuses, and then the woodcutter says, well, then off with you then. And then as the stranger starts to walk away, and the woodcutter takes his axe and cuts him down, kills him, and then drags his body to the river. But when he comes back, the disc, he can't find the disc, and he's been looking for it ever since. So that's the story.
Yeah. Yeah. I have no idea. Like we've been going at this. I we had like a whole episode where we were trying to dig into it, and the weird thing he says he worships Odin. No, he's in the line of Odin or something like that. And he
Yeah.
has when the guy shows up, he's got a scar across his face. So I didn't know if this had something to do with Odin losing his eye too. We were getting at that. I was like, I don't know if it's maybe the guy wants the disc. The woodcutter wants the disc so he can sell it, so he can become king, which is kind of not the same. The
Yeah.
guy's like, so
Yeah.
I don't know if it's something like maybe seeing one-sidedly. He only sees in the material realm, and so that's why he can't find the disc. Like I'm grabbing at
That's a
straws
good
here.
that's a good interpretation. And it turns it into a kind of allegory, but that's good. That's like one really good interpretation. Um I'm trying to remember, because I've read, the Norse myths. I don't remember anything about a pentacle or a disc in those
Yeah,
myths, but maybe later I'll remember something and kind of uh be really disappointed I
I
didn't
d-
remember it now.
I don't
Um
think there is. See, the weird thing is, have you ever read Blue Tigers by the by is it Jorge I can't remember
Luis
his.
Borges.
Yeah.
Blue Tiger. I read Ficciones and I read the LF. So
Okay.
whatever was in those, I can't remember if I read
Well,
that one.
well, in Blue Tigers, he mentions discs as well. So I don't know if it's a symbol that's more. I don't know if it's a symbol from Greek myths or if it's a symbol that the author's personally using, which is high enough. So I might have to read more by him to pick up on the how he uses the disc symbol or
Yeah,
something. But I don't
how
know.
the symbol kind of maps onto his tracks through his work.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. I think that it has something to do with there's also in a lot of the Germanic and Norse myths, Odin shows up at your house as a stranger to test you. And so Odin would suddenly, like, appear as an old man and then knock at people's doors to test their hospitality, right? Because in those cultures, being hospitable was
Okay.
a duty, something you owed other humans.
Hmm.
So Odin would test people by showing up as a kind of stranger and then seeing if they would let them in. And so that's why I picked up on that and the scar across the face as well. I'm like, oh, this is Odin. This is Odin testing this guy. Um, and he fails the test. He fails the test because he can't believe in what
Yeah.
he can't. Well, it's not that he doesn't believe in the disc. He obviously believes in it, but he just sees it as a trinket to be sold.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, there's almost this convicting aspect too, because he says, "I don't worship Odin, I worship Christ," and then he cuts the man down.
right.
And you're like, "Oh man,
Yeah.
come on."
I don't see, those two things don't go together too well. I
Yeah,
worship
yeah,
Christ, although, and historically,
yeah,
a lot of people who say they worship Christ cut people down with axes. So I don't know.
yeah.
I
Testing
don't,
his
I wouldn't make
hospitality.
too much. I wouldn't make too much of the uh, like it's a critique of Christianity. I don't think it
Oh
works
yeah,
that
I don't
way.
think. Yeah, I don't think that
Um,
is either. And it's weird too because I almost don't want to find out what it means. Like it seems
well, of
like such a
course,
vague,
yeah.
weird story that it's like it's so intriguing because of that. But I feel like it could apply. I feel like something's gonna happen to me at some point in my life, and I'll be like, "Oh, that's the disc."
That's
Oh,
what
no,
it was
yeah,
about.
yeah. But then
I
it'll
feel
like then
exactly the
it'll
same. Yeah.
elude me or something. Like I'll be like, "Oh no, that wasn't the disc," and it'll come back around again. My friend Mitch was like, "I
In
think the
some other
story's the
context.
disc, and that's why we can't get at it." But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
can let you go here in a minute. There was
We're
like,
we're
sorry, go ahead.
we're expecting it to have two sides, like an
Yeah.
allegorical side, but it's just the one side. But we keep looking for the other side, and we can't see just for what it is. It's just a story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
I
yeah.
think you're right.
And
Yeah.
Borges is so brilliant that and I will remember this story as I remember a lot of his stories, but this one in particular hit me hard today. It came out at the right time, so thank you for
Oh,
sharing
well,
it.
that's good. I'm glad that. Yeah. Yeah, the Blue Tigers, I like that one better, but it's a little bit longer. This one's super short, so it's very easy to share as well. But
Yeah,
there was one other thing I wrote down, and then I can let you go. And it was just because I would have brought it up earlier, but I was actually reading today and the scriptures, and then it made me think about it, and I was like, I should just bring this up uh before I let you go, otherwise I might regret it. But there's because I was reading Song of Songs, and I don't know, there's this idea that just has just been hitting me, like, because it's have you are you familiar with the book at all? The
yeah,
song?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, and it's very, like, poetic, a lot of imagery and everything. It's got a lot
Hmm.
of garden imagery, um, but it's just recently I've been thinking, like, how Tolkien talks about the creation coming in a form of song, and I'm just like, this is it for some reason, because I there's this weird play
Mm,
with Solomon, um, and I haven't heard many people talk about it, but like Solomon means peaceable, and then his wife, like, so there's like peace and rest and death are like all connected. And the
nice.
seventh day is rest, like his mother's name is Bathsheba, so Sheba is means seven. Then the Queen of Sheba comes to him, and there's like another seven. And there's this weird connection, and then in the Song of Songs, it's like you have the king and it's this interplay between the king and the Shulamite woman. And so Shulam is like shalom, which is also like
Shalom.
peace and
Yeah,
rest. And I think it's
yeah.
like this weird interplay between how death gives birth to life and how the king has to enter into death, and then it brings forth life.
Oh,
And it's the book's gotten really strange for me now because now it's like you can kind of see this weird sort of like sleep, death, dream world thing going on at the same time, and that they'll say
wow.
like until the day breaks and the shadows flee away, like turn my beloved and all this stuff, and it's just this weird. It's gotten even more beautiful. It's very strange. I don't know. I just wanted to bring it up because I'm like I feel like you're the right guy.
Fantastic.
The way you think and the way you put things together, I feel like you're the right guy to bring that up to. I
Well,
don't know.
I I can read it before we meet again. Let's just,
Okay.
next time we meet, We will
Yeah,
discuss the Song of
that'd be
Songs.
great. I'd love to talk
Yeah.
again. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
If
Yeah.
whenever that happens. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. It was
Yeah.
really good to meet you, man.
Yeah, it was great to meet you too. Oh, do you wanna, like, plug anything or say anything you got coming up? Or I mean, I'll put links in
Not
the
I said it all at the beginning.
okay.
If
Alright.
people want to find me, they'll figure it out.
Right.
JF Martel.
Alright. Google this guy. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thanks again so much. It was great talking to you. Thank you so for spending your
Thank
time. I
you.
know. Alright. Well, you have a good night.
You too.
Alright. See ya.
Bye.